everyone, for this What I Would Have Done Thursday, I'm going to be looking at the sequel that is probably really well known to people, and some people I think have drawn a lot of criticism from it, and I believe that criticism is legit, and I kind of wanted to address it. But without further ado, let me discuss The Godfather Part 3. Oh yes. It's kind of interesting to discuss this one. Especially coming from a series of films that have become so iconic. The thing about Godfather 3 is that it came out, I believe, in a very huge time gap compared to when the first two films came out, from my understanding. Therefore, again, the actors are a lot older, and there's a lot of people that have already been killed off within the last two films, that it's sort of hard to sort of regenerate the story. So what ends up resulting here is, I think, a sort of meh kind of third installment. And kind of like in the same thing with The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, even the director said, I don't even see a point in trying to make a third movie. He said that, but to his credit, he seemed to feel like he could. Unfortunately, I don't think it was that successful, but regardless, let's discuss a little bit of the problems of this film that I believe it had, and address what I would have done in order to make the film maybe better or more enjoyable to the Godfather going and loving public, and or just moviegoers in general. And again, I'm sure there's people out there who enjoy all three films, and I'm not saying that the first two are completely free from flaws, but I think the third one really stands out as being the sort of dud in the series. So that's why I'm kind of going to be going through this one in particular. A major problem that this movie does suffer from is the aspect of repetition. There's a lot of things and scenes sort of replicate the second movie, and focus in on certain plot points that sort of deal with the second film. There's even some dialogue within the third film that's actually similar to the dialogue within the second film. And the thing is, too, is that there was a lot of care that was given to, I think, the first two Godfather movies when it came to sort of the family. And there's a lot of integrity that Francis Ford Coppola did in trying to create this family story and this family dynamic that includes Michael Corleone and all the other characters. But in this movie, there's really not a whole lot of people to care about. And the reason why I say this is for twofold. One, some of the characters are completely switched around as to that their actions don't make any sense. In particular, Michael Corleone's character, who's supposed to be very serious and sort of monotone and not really a bubbling kind of go-lucky guy, is presented in the third film as rather happy, and it's almost like it skipped this very important part of time that somehow changed his whole character. But he doesn't seem like a bitter old man, which is what you'd think by the end of the second film that he would ultimately end up becoming. But again, there's just kind of this weird inconsistency there. There's also inconsistency with his, I believe it's the sister character, his sister in particular. She's portrayed in the first two films as being very dramatic and often crying and not able to hold her emotions back. In the third film, she's again completely monotone and serious, and somehow gets it in with doing Corleone's work. which doesn't really work because the sister really wasn't involved with it. So it's kind of it's that's one part of what makes this third installment hard to enjoy. Also, nobody cares because not only do they change certain characters around that we've come to enjoy to begin with, but it also brings in new characters that we ultimately cannot, I guess, as an audience, I think, fully get behind. For example, Corleone's daughter, who ends up having a relationship with her cousin. And yes, this is where the incest comes in, and I'm not sure if people got freaked out about that, but that was, I think, one issue. Also the fact, too, that the romance apparently wasn't all that interesting to begin with, and her character not all that compelling. So that is, I think, something that really contributed to the film's detriment. Even the girl who is the daughter of Francis Ford Coppola, she even mentioned that she really didn't want to do acting and she didn't want to do this role, really. And it kind of shows at times, even within the dialogue. She's almost like, I don't even know why I'm here. I don't even know why I'm doing this. I don't know what I'm doing. And I just kind of want to go, oh, yeah, oh, that's a bummer. It's a bummer that you don't know what you're doing. So it has all these problems: the repetition, the lack of character development or character consistency, and the lack of characters having that charisma or likability like the first two installments. So what can be done to alter these problems? Well, there might be some things that could be done. I think one of these things could have been trying to focus on a consistent story. The third installment, I think, gets a bad rap for not being very clear with its story and having the Vatican come in and then have this whole conspiracy thing sort of unravel, but it doesn't do a good job of, I guess, really ultimately explaining the plot to the audience. So it lacks the sort of simplicity, I guess, that the first two films had, and I guess it just gets a little bit too overblown with villains that we don't ultimately end up caring about. So I think what should have been done is it should have been narrowed down, and there should have been more of a focus. And instead of trying to bring up all of these new characters that we don't really know, I think I would rather stay true to the characters again. You could address the sister, and you could address Michael Corleone, but again, you have to make sure that once you're doing that, you're keeping consistent to the character that you created in the first two installments. So, I think the Vatican could have been an interesting plot point, considering the fact that the Pope, I think, just actually recently announced that we want to stay away from the mafia at all times, and it makes you wonder if maybe some people within those circles did get themselves involved with the mafia. So it makes for interesting commentary, and I think an interesting plot that could work. I just think there should have been a more conciseness to it, and there should have been a lot more, I think, intrigue. Again, with like the other two installments. Again, you could have it be sort of similar to the two films where, again, it's all about greed, corruption, all so on and so forth, except maybe pertaining it to the Vatican. And just at the same time, just making it consistent, making it concise. Don't bulge us in with a ton of new characters. Just condense it and make it simplistic enough for the audience to follow. I think also, again, the characters should be kept consistent. If you change the characters around to the point where your creation doesn't look like what you originally created, then you got a problem. It's like making the statue of David and then trying to recreate it and then make it into something that it's not, like maybe The Thinker, or I don't know. It's just like taking art and transforming it into something else, when you can't really do that if you want to keep consistent to what you initially created. And again, I know there's going to be certain inconsistencies and difficulties and humps that go along with that. But regardless, I think what could have been done is had Francis Ford Coppola kept a little bit of the consistencies with the characters, had he made had he made Michael Corleone bitter and lonesome and in misery, and maybe this is the point where he just bites the bullet, which is pretty much what ends up happening in the third movie. But if they reinforce that breaking point, maybe where in the second movie he sort of becomes the enemy, so to speak, and in the third movie he's just the enemy, and there's no kind of going back, and there's maybe a little bit of less likability that we had towards him as a character, but we do understand from the previous films and how he was ultimately sucked into this world. We can maybe ultimately end up maybe not necessarily sympathizing him, but understand his journey, so to speak, as a character. But unfortunately, I think this was very lackluster because, again, he didn't really keep true to the character. So that's, I think, something that's a really big issue and that needed to be consistent, and I don't think that was really there. Along with the sister, too, you could have had her maybe just be a side character, just watching from the outskirts. Because, again, this is a very I don't want to say it's a testosterone-filled movie, but usually women were kept sort of out of that business because they probably knew that had they gotten involved, it would probably be a detriment to the entire family. So I think it only makes sense in the first two films had they left the women outside of that circle. But in this film, again, the sister is involved, so I think it would have just made great commentary for sort of like she takes the place maybe of Corleone's wife, who in the second film, who ends up getting all messed up because of the circumstances that Corleone put the family in. So again, you could have kind of touched in on that aspect, and maybe the idea of he's losing someone maybe from his own blood, something to that effect, I think could have really worked. But it's almost hard to do, I think, when your actors are a lot older and they've gone through various other roles. It's hard to kind of maybe come back and go back to that consistency of the characters. So if I were for Coppola, I would have definitely done this film a lot earlier. I don't think it couldn't have been done. Again, I think that there was a little bit of a room of a possibility to have a third film. I think more so than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But at the same time, again, it all really comes down to timing and timing it out correctly. And I think if you're going to make a film, you need to time things properly, and if you don't, then it really puts a detriment. So that's what I feel should have been done. had there been more of a consistent story, had there been more conciseness with the characters and consistency to the characters, had there been less characters that we don't care about and we don't really need to explore, not there either. And had they focused on trying to, again, not be repetitive to the second film, I think we could have had something that would have worked. But I think when it's almost 20 years, I think it was 18 years. It was 18 years until finally they made the third installment. And if you wait just that long, there's just no way. There's just no possible way that you can return to that that mindset that you had before. So I think had they made a third film, it should have been a lot more just a little bit closer to this when the second film came out. And again, I think the third film could have wrapped things up with, Corleone sort of ultimately, sort of biting the dust, so to speak. I think that conclusion sort of suffices. But I mean, I also kind of like the conclusion of the second film, where it's just like he just lives in misery, because of what he's become. You could have just ended with that, and that still would have been beautiful. So again, I'm sort of on the either or would have been fine. If they made a third film, that wouldn't have been, I think, a detriment. But since I hate this film, it unfortunately kind of, I think, made a lot of people disappointed. But I wouldn't say, I don't think it's the worst film or worst sequel ever, but it does have problems, and I think these problems are a result, again, of the things that I've mentioned, and what I would have done to correct those things sort of is highlighted in the flaws that exist within this film. But I think that's ultimately really all I can say about The Godfather Part 3. It's there. It's there. But yeah, I think that's ultimately all I can say. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But I hope you all have a great day, week, month, and year. And year. And thank you all so much for watching.